Thank you, Kate. Oh, thank you, Kate, very much. And welcome to everybody who's joining us from wherever you may be in the world on this beautiful planet that we call home. And whatever time of the day or night you may be in, we are in the same moment of Christ, the present moment. And we are in the same place as we move from the head into the heart. The heart is universal. So thank you also to the WCCM USA for hosting this present Earth Crisis Forum and sharing it around the community in the way that we've been doing has been a vivid expression of the unity of the topic that we are exploring, which is the crisis we are in, not in simply a negative or fearful way, but trying to understand wisely what it means and how we can come through it, how we can evolve through it. Human beings are very good at evolving through dangerous extinctions or apparent extinctions. So welcome to you all, and as usual, we'll begin with meditation. And some people, I think not so many of us gathered here now, but some people might say, what's the point in meditating? Why not just get on with talking about solutions to the problem, to the crisis? And I think we would most of us understand that meditating, as we are going to do, is a contribution to the solution to the problem we're facing. And it may be the catalyst for that change of consciousness, which is necessary if we are to evolve through this problem in extinction, the danger of extinction, or the danger of damaging our home so badly that we will even perhaps be unable to live on it. So meditation in this sense is vital. I think more and more we are aware that a change of consciousness is necessary, and I'll be talking about that for a few minutes after the meditation when we begin our full session. But in many traditions, there is a creation myth which imagines or describes how the Creator brought everything into being during meditation, during the Creator's own meditative work. And that creation itself is the work of divine meditation, of divine contemplation. Now that is an interesting similarity between different indigenous religious traditions, and indeed perhaps even in our own, in the biblical tradition. The Spirit of God hovers over the abyss, the unconscious, and from which order now emerges as cosmos, from chaos to cosmos. And there is a profound relationship between creation and our ability to embrace chaos within ourselves. Any creative work, any creative person teaches us that very rarely do great works of art or great works of beauty or great discoveries come without entering into a kind of unmaking, a kind of unknowing, a kind of letting go. And that's why I think in our own individual ways, but also in our collective way as a community, we can understand that we are entering into a creative work when we meditate. And that's why one of the dangers we have to face when we meditate is that you may, after a few minutes, get some really great ideas, or if you're an artist, some great insights into, or images or thoughts, and you may be frightened of losing them if you return to the mantra, which is the way we teach. But anyone who does understand meditation knows that we have to let go of that first experience of creativity in order to enter more deeply into what seems perhaps like nothingness or poverty or even chaos. But then as we do so, we come into union deeper and deeper with the Creator, with the creative source of our own being and of all beings. So this is a little preparation just for explaining what we do when we meditate, which I'll describe now in a few words, and then we'll meditate for about 15 or 20 minutes. When we meditate, we're not trying to achieve anything or to prove anything or to grasp anything. It's much easier and better for us to understand it as a letting go, as a letting go of wanting to acquire anything at all. And it's really just about being. But that being involves a shedding, a letting go, a divesting of our whole world of thought, imagination, and fantasy, and desire, and anxiety, and fear, and so on. So how do we do that? In order to go through those levels of ourselves, of our consciousness, perhaps we are also going through levels of the cosmos. We let go of thoughts as they arise. And by thought, I mean anything, really, that the mind imagines or anticipates or remembers or is trying to solve or analyze. So we let go of all thoughts. And we do this not by struggling against our thoughts, because we would get exhausted and give up very quickly, but we do this in a beautiful, simple, sacred, and universal method of pure prayer, prayer of the heart. We take a single word, a mantra, a sacred word, and we repeat this word faithfully, gently throughout the time of the meditation. So the art of meditation is not destroying your thoughts, but it's returning to the mantra continuously. And you may find at some point during the meditation that you've stopped saying the mantra altogether. Just come back to it. Or you may find that you're saying the mantra, but half of your mind or more is taken up with solving a problem or caught up in a daydream. Just let go of that daydream or problem solving and return to the mantra. It's a childlike path, a narrow path, but it leads to life, and it takes us deeper and deeper into our heart. That means the universal center of our being. And in that sense, we discover the source of our creation. And one of the fruits of that is that we know ourselves to be part of the whole cosmos, of the whole creation. We belong, we are part of it, we love it, and we are loved by it. So choosing the word that we say is important because we stay with the same word throughout the meditation. The word I would recommend is the word Maranatha. 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 If you choose that word, or whatever word you choose, stay with the same word. Say it gently, faithfully, pay attention to it, and return to it when you get distracted or half distracted. It's as simple as it sounds, and it brings us to that experience of simplicity, childlikeness that Jesus speaks about, and which is necessary if we are to evolve, if we are to become who we are called to be. So let's take a moment to sit comfortably with our backs straight. Meditation is not just a head trip, and don't be too spiritual about it. It's an integration of body, mind, and spirit. And your body is very important. And you will find a deeper healing and a deeper acceptance of your body and understanding, wisdom of the body through meditation. So sit with your back straight, relax your shoulders, relax the muscles of your face, and put your hands on your lap or on your knees. Close your eyes lightly. Breathe normally and begin our work. We're going to begin with a short reading from Teilhard de Chardin. Krista from our community here is going to read it for us. And I think it leads us into that understanding of unity, which we were talking about.
Hymn to Matter. Blessed be you, harsh matter, barren soil, stubborn rock, you who yield only to violence, you who force us to work if we would eat. Blessed are you, perilous matter, violent sea, untamable passion, you who, unless we fetter you, will devour us. Blessed be you, mighty matter, irresistible march of evolution, reality ever newborn, you who, by constantly shattering our mental categories, force us to go ever further and further in our pursuit of truth. Blessed be you, universal matter, immeasurable time, boundless ether, triple abyss of stars and atoms and generations, you who are, by overflowing and dissolving our narrow standards of measurements, reveal to us the dimensions of God.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you can all hear me well. My name is Kaveh Guilanpour, and I've been given the honor of moderating this event today. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us from wherever you are around the world for this Seventh Earth Crisis Forum on Bearing Witness. And we're going to be exploring with a really fantastic panel today the issue of awareness. Awareness and the link between that and the climate crisis that we're facing. And I think Father Laurence really already drew on many of the links there in his introduction to the meditation, as he always does. I think he said everything that needs to be said, but we'll see if we can go in a little bit deeper. If people in the audience do have questions, if you would put them in the chat, if there's time, we will come to you, and we will try to come to your questions if there's time at the end. But there's a lot to get through, and we have a really fantastic panel. We're going to start by watching a short film, which is called We Are Nature, which is produced by a grassroots movement that's seeking to change the English language dictionary definition of the word nature to include humans. So, Leo, if you could play that video, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Leo. I think it's interesting that for those of you who couldn't see it, if you've got small screens or you're joining from the phone, that most of the English language definitions of nature have us as separate from nature as opposed to a part of it. I do wonder whether that's just a problem that we face in the English speaking world or in the sort of Western world, as it's called. But it ended with the point that we are nature. And on that note, I'd like to turn to our first guest, Father Laurence Freeman, who, of course, all of you know, he's just led our meditation. But what I didn't know is I'd read now just in my notes that before entering monastic life, he worked at the United Nations in New York. I didn't know that. And also in banking and journalism. So you learn something new every day. And of course, he's the author of several books. Many of you will have read them already. Father Laurence, I don't know if you're there or if Leo could spotlight you. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. You're muted there, Father Laurence, but I was just going to ask you a couple of questions. You sort of touched on that in the introduction to the meditation, and the theme of this forum is the link between awareness and climate change. What are your thoughts on how the two might be related? An easy question for you to start with there.
Well, thank you, Kaveh. Thank you very much for guiding us through this particular forum. I'd like to begin. Well, I don't know what to begin with, really. There are so many wonderful things I could begin with. Let me begin with this Christian hymn or Christian poem from the 2nd century by the great teacher Gregory Nazianzen. and it's addressed to God, but it is in a way addressed equally to nature and how nature understands God, reveals the divine to us. I'll just read it, a few words from it. It's very beautiful and very mysterious in a simple way. O you, he's speaking to God, O you who art beyond all things, how can you be called by another name? What hymn can sing of you? No name describes you. What mind can grasp you? No intellect conceive you. You only are inexpressible. All that is spoken comes forth from you. You only are unknowable. All creatures praise you, those that speak and those that are dumb. All creatures bow down before you, those that can think and those that have no power of thought. The universal longing, the groaning of creation, tends towards you. Everything that exists prays to you, and to you every creature that can read your universe sends up a hymn of silence. In you alone all things dwell. With a single impulse, all things find their goal in you. You are the purpose of every creature. That's from Gregory of Nazianzen. And I think it's not empty praise. I think it comes from a deep contemplation of the beauty and the wonder of the material world, of the universe, and everything in it. And in that book of creation, it describes the manifestation of the Creator, of God, from whom it has come. Now, Teilhard de Chardin, a great Jesuit philosopher, mystic, and scientist of the last century, wrote a book also called The Hymn of the Universe, which in the language of his time, similar to Gregory of Nazianzen, but less poetically perhaps, or in a different kind of poetry, describes the same experience of seeing, and I'm using this word strongly, seeing the divine in the material. Teilhard speaks of the diaphany, which means the luminosity of the material world, that there is a radiant presence of the sacred through the whole fabric of the universe. And if you've seen any of the new photographs that have come from the Rubin telescope, which published its first images of the furthest reaches of the universe that we have yet been able to see physically, I think you will have felt, at least for a moment, even on the screen or on the page, you would have felt this wonder that both Gregory of Nazianzen in the 2nd century, Teilhard de Chardin in the 20th century have felt, this sense of wonder and of the sacred. And the director of the new Rubin telescope was speaking about his wonder in an interview recently, in which he said this was the culmination of a long dream and of a long process of development and scientific process. And he said, it is teaching us things that we have not even been able to think of. It is showing us things that
Can I ask you, can I ask you a little bit more about that, Father Laurence?
go
So,
on. Yeah.
I mean, when you opened for the meditation, you talked about the purpose of meditation, that we may feel that it's not achieving anything, but that actually we are contributing even in doing that. And I wonder, I mean, you've written and talked about inner and outer ecology. And you've just sort of spoken about our connection to nature and the wonder of it, including in the farthest reaches of the universe. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about this connection between our own inner awareness and the connection to the the outer awareness, this sort of concept of an inner and outer ecology.
Well, you're a meditator, Kaveh, as well. You would be able to do that as well, if not better than me. But I think I was going to say what that scientist said. It is teaching us things we have not even thought of, which is a scientist's way of saying we are entering into the path of unknowing
Mm.
and into silence, in other words, silence of thought, silence as well as physical silence. And this is this is the great liberation from thinking of science, which we have done for quite a long time now, as the final arbiter of reality and the final judge of what is true and what is not true. And or and it's a liberation from the prison of materialism by telling us not the material world is inferior or fallen or sinful or inadequate, but quite the reverse, that the material world, our own bodies and our and the world, the beautiful world that we live in with all its everything that Taya was describing, that is diaphanous, it's luminous, it is showing us something. And if we lose that vision of the sacred, the sacredness of matter, then we lose the reverence and the wisdom that keeps us in harmony with the universe, with our ecology, as we call it. And we become like property developers that are looking at a beautiful landscape and then say, oh, no, how can I fill this with resorts and expensive properties? So yes, I think what you say about the inner ecology and the outer ecology is a vital image for us to understand how we're going to change our minds. In other words, we will change the way we act when we change the way we think and see.
There's a link here to our next guest that we'll come into in a few minutes. Tom, I spoke to him earlier about this question of having humility, even as a scientist, and acknowledging that we don't know. It strikes me that a lot of the what is the heart of the climate crisis is suffering, whether it's people, animals, or the wider ecosystem. And of course, the question of suffering and how to, I'm not a theologian, as you know, so I choose all the wrong words, but how to overcome suffering is also at the heart of many, if not all, religious and spiritual traditions. I'm wondering how viewing the climate crisis through that sort of lens might help us to find a way forward.
Well, I think we can, as the Dalai Lama would say in a very rational way, we can say that if we are experiencing suffering, the first thing we have to say is, can I reduce it or can I stop it? And if I can, then I should do so. I can do so. And we should do that to other people suffering. Come to their help, reduce it or take them, cure it. And if we can't, then we have to go through it. We have to make sense of it. We have to accept it and embrace it. But so much of the suffering that is being caused by our ecological dysfunctional behavior is avoidable. And just as we see on the news from Ukraine or from Gaza, this is avoidable suffering. It's human beings who are doing who are choosing to impose this suffering on others. And with the ecological crisis, we are all complicit in some way for imposing this on ourselves and others. It's a kind of a self-punishment or a self-harm that we are involved in. And that's where, consciousness has to awaken. And that's why the teaching of meditation to children, along with an understanding of the origin of the universe, the wonder of the universe, and the responsibilities for the ecological crisis, that's bringing that combination to bear fruit in the education of children is probably vital for the future.
Thank you, Father Laurence. I think you really made that connection very nicely about consciousness and the theme of awareness here, and what link that might play as a first step towards overcoming the climate crisis. It's also, I didn't know, but today is the first International Day of Hope. I saw that the UN Secretary General just announced. So I'm hoping that we inspire some hope in people by the time we get to the end of this webinar. If you could stay on, Father Laurence, I might bring you in at the end to give some thoughts on what we've heard from our speakers. But thank you very much for kicking us off. It's my pleasure now to turn to Tom Mustill, who's a conservation biologist turned filmmaker and writer. And Tom specializes in stories where people and nature meet. His first book, How to Speak Whale, A Voyage into the Future of Animal Communication, was named a New Yorker Best Book of 2022. And Tom has worked with David Attenborough and Greta Thunberg, and he's been nominated for an Emmy. And Tom, I understand that you undertook a boat journey to join us today, and you're not in a tropical island, but you are on the island of the British Isles, the United Kingdom and Cornwall. Tom, thank you very much for joining us. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now that brings you from such a beautiful setting.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I should add that I don't normally join calls from such a nice place. I'm just in Cornwall with my colleagues. This is our little boat that we've been doing some research on dolphin bow riding on, and we're just down here this weekend. We're building a setup to investigate dolphin culture and personality around play. And the reason that we're doing this research project is to help mediate in human-dolphin conflicts. There are hundreds of thousands of dolphins are killed every year intentionally, or it was very interesting, as Father Laurence had to say, like wastefully, by accident in bycatch. And so the hope is that by showing people that these animals have agency, can experience joy in relationships and have cultures and things like that, that helps provide an opening to resolving some of these unnecessary conflicts. But it's also really nice because I get to hang out with lots of dolphins and come to nice places like this sometimes.
Yeah. And why is, I mean, just very briefly, it may be a statement of the obvious. We've just had the first, well, I think the first UN Ocean Conference in Nice, which I believe you were at. Why is the ocean so important to the global ecosystem and the climate crisis?
I mean, well, the ocean is most of the global ecosystem. It's easier to forget on the land. And as you have, of course, I've been to a few COP climate meetings, and it's been really startling how little the ocean has been mentioned until quite recently. But more and more recently, especially with this last UN Oceans Conference, there seems to be a lot more attention being paid to it. Obviously, we're land animals, and it's hard for us to imagine life outside of land. But in order to solve many of the pressing issues we have to involve solutions of the ocean, but also just on a different level in terms of like wonder and the experience of the sublime. that I can't think of any better place. I mean, it's hard to think of the ocean as a place because it's so multidimensional and indescribable.
Yeah, I'm struck by the connection of what you just said there and what Father Laurence was saying about this latest research with the universe. But also, I had the pleasure of speaking to you before. Some of the things Father Laurence said really resonated with our previous conversation. I mean, I know that you're really interested in this connection of sort of communication within ecosystems and between animals and humans, how animals interact with each other, and particularly on this concept of Umwelt, which I think is German for ecology or environment. But maybe you could speak a little bit more about Umwelt and what that means to you.
Well, I guess Umwelt is it's used primarily as in the biological sense for us to interrogate the perceptual and cognitive worlds of other species, or at least that's what it has been used for to now. It's a term where for a long time we've just sort of assumed that we had the best perspective on life on Earth and that our senses kind of put us at the top of a cognitive and perceptive pyramid, and other animals were sort of beneath us. But the more we've explored and the more curious we've been, we've realized that other animals can have kinds of senses even that we don't, like echolocation, or can see parts of the light spectrum, or hear sounds from above and below our hearing, like dolphins and whales, for instance. And so that informs, I suppose, a philosophical and a biological inquiry into and a kind of humility that as we go through life, we are not really seeing all of what is there, and that other animals may be getting totally different perspectives. But my particular interest in this, and I think it's one that people don't talk very much in discussions of Umwelt, is really what you do with those sensations. Like you can talk about what is it like to be a bat, or what is it like to be an eagle, but people always just think about senses. What is it like to sense in sound, or as an echolocating animal, or fly like an eagle? But people don't tend to think so much about what is it like to have the relations of another social animal. What is it like to have the emotions of other animals? And I think that is what's really interesting, was being discussed, I think, potentially for the first time at UNOC, in discussions of bycatch, animals caught accidentally and unintentionally, but still killed and thrown away as waste in fishing. What was it like for those animals to have those experiences? And what kinds of lives are being interrupted? So that if you like have, for instance, a dolphin in a dolphinarium, until very recently, discussions about whether that dolphin was having a decent life involved, like, does it have enough fish? Is it a big box like the sea? But we don't think, well, this is a social animal that learns a particular signature whistle, like a name, in its infancy, totally cannot survive by itself and lives in an extended social group, potentially has a different sense of self from the ones that we have, maybe even has different versions of strong affection and affiliative bonds, maybe even forms of love that we cannot appreciate. And that's the part that I'm interested in, not just like what an animal senses that we can't see, but what it then does with it and constructs in its relational life.
I mean, there's so many connections between what you've just said and what Father Laurence said. I don't know if I have the skill to make the connections, to articulate them. But I mean, you mentioned humility and not knowing, as did Father Laurence. I mean, I'm going to ask you a slightly strange question. I think if everybody asked what the color of the sky was behind you now, I would imagine that everybody on this call would probably say that the sky is blue. But is it actually blue?
Well, I mean, this is a question that we don't have long enough to really answer, but a philosopher would give you a different answer from a neurobiologist, and also my friend Tristram would give you a different answer from me because he perceives color differently. I guess the only answer I can think of is yes and no, and we don't know all at once. My daughter's 2. I don't know anybody who's been around a small child will notice that when they're learning their colors, it's not a process of just identifying a color in the same way that, like, she knows what a doggy is, and she knows what a rainbow is, and she knows what a plane is, and never needs correcting. But I'm still having to say, no, that's green, or that's blue, or that's orange. And so you have to form a sort of cultural consensus because we don't all perceive colors in the same way, even as the same species. But marine mammals, for instance, like marine mammals, so seals and dolphins and whales do not have the cones in their eyes that allow them, that allow us, the three kinds of cones we have, to determine the differences between different parts of the visible light spectrum to humans that we call red and green and blue. But dolphins and other marine mammals have lost that ability and have become like night adapted mammals in the daytime. Like, so they instead focus all of their perceptive visual abilities on light intensity. So nocturnal animals don't need to see the difference between colors, but it's much more useful, nocturnal mammals, to see when daytime animals can't see. So if you jump in the sea with a dolphin and you look at the sea or the sky and you say, is that blue? Or if you look at, say, maybe an object on the surface of the sea, like a buoy, like that buoy that's floating out behind me, and you say, what color is that? They won't be able to tell you. But if you go 30 or 40 meters down when there's not enough light, you will not be able to see it. It doesn't exist for you, but the dolphin or the whale or the seal will be able to see it. So I guess that allows, when you start to think about that, you think, well, there's both something that we can see and imagine that they cannot, and that we have ways of describing and interact with. But there's also ways that they will then perceive the ocean that we can't imagine too, with an intensity and fidelity potentially to its richness.
I think you touch on something very profound, but in case our American audience is worried, a buoy in English is a buoy in American, so we don't have a...
Oh, sorry, yeah, there's nobody's drowning here, just
There's
something
nobody,
like an inert object floating. Yeah.
Exactly. But you touch on something very profound, which is, and again, I apologize to Father Laurence because I don't know how to put this in theological terms, but that essentially we, in the Dalai Lama would probably say that we shouldn't make judgments. And when we say the sky is blue, we're obviously making a judgment. And to some extent, we have to make judgments all the time to get through life. But meditation and humility, in my understanding, is trying to get towards experiencing reality or creation or whatever you want to call it as it is. I want to sort of pull on this thread a little bit, if you don't mind, Tom. I mean, in conservation biology, what the question I have for you is, what is it that you're trying to preserve? Because everything in the universe is constantly changing. And if there's one constant, it's change. So what is it that you're trying to preserve, and what is your constant that you sense is at the center of all of this?
I think that's a really interesting question that actually conservationists, biologists are grappling with now. And I think it's changed. You know, the beginning of conservation biology was actually often, I mean, is linked to elites having hunting estates that other people can't go into, and indigenous peoples being excluded from the places that they used to be. And then I think as conservation biology as a science has progressed, we've been coming to terms with the idea that actually natural systems are constantly changing. And I think this overlaps a lot with sort of the teachings of the Buddha and a lot of other religious teaching that, you know, you cannot hold a system that exists to change. You know, like life is constantly evolving and shifting and interacting in a state of sort of, I don't know, your ideal perfection. And so when I learned conservation biology at university, like 20 odd years ago, I think people were still thinking, how can we just keep everywhere as it is? And I think maybe that's shifting, and there are different ideals in conflict with each other. However, and also in relation to Friar Lawrence, what he was saying before, there is an understanding more that there is pain and waste and suffering in these systems, and that is, in some cases, unnecessary. I think the more curious you are, and the more you understand that we do not see and know all that there is in a scene behind us, in a way that the more pain there is in conservation. You know, only in the last decade or so has it become scientifically widespread and accepted that animals, non-human animals, have cultures, learned behaviors that are distinct to their populations, The way that killer whales hunt differently in Antarctica, watching seals off ice floes from beaching themselves in Argentina. And so when I learned conservation, the paradigm was, if you just saved the animals, if there were 2 killer whales left and then their populations grew back up to 1,000, the killer whales were fine. But no, you've lost a lot of their diversity and their culture. And then again in welfare, but a lot of it's only been recently that there's been an acceptance of the levels of pain that other animals might be able to experience, both physical pain and emotional pain, and dignity and I just humility. I just saw in the chat these ideas. These are all axes of what were considered uniquely human attributes that, as we allow ourselves to find these signs of in non-human life, we are upset to discover we're disturbing at the same time. And so there is now a move, for instance, in conservation to recognize culture, and that non-human cultures should be factored into our decision-making about other lives of other animals and which ones are protected. So I guess, I think in terms of Umwelt, the more open we are both to imagining that there are forms that we cannot, of existence that we cannot ourselves have, but also that maybe there are forms of existence, of experience that we have that other animals might too. I think conservation is just getting a lot more complicated because there are many more ways that pain can be caused that we feel responsible for and realize we can have an effect on.
One of the things that we touched on, if you don't mind me bringing it up, when we spoke earlier, was that I think this tension between constant change. In my own work, the world is always going to change, and in 8 billion years, we're told it's going to cease to exist. So part of me kind of wonders, well, what's the point of trying to do anything? Because there seems to be some sort of inevitability. But I think you touched really nicely on this, that if I might paraphrase, you've come to the point where you do the work without expectation for the fruits or the end point, but it's the work that's important. Maybe I don't want to steal your thunder, but maybe you could just go into that a little bit, Tom.
Well, I think you've just put it really well. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I think about it very much, to be honest. I think I just get stuck in. I wouldn't want to be paralyzed by the idea that it might not work. At the same time as I don't want that to be the reason that I do something or don't do something. All the people who I admire who have done things have done them without knowing if they would work. I also feel better when I'm engaged in doing things. There is to exercise agency in the hope of improving things in good faith, especially in community with other people, I feel is in a way the point of life, even if it's hard to make a wider point of life, given that, like you said, the sun will expand and perhaps everything will end. But I guess it's wanting to push back against unnecessary wastefulness with other people, and it's also just, I find it a satisfying life to try. I don't want to make it's actually very selfish. I feel better doing this stuff. I find it much more enjoyable than saying, oh God, it's all ruined, let's not bother. That I don't feel very good then. That doesn't make me happy.
Again, I think you've touched on so many things there, Tom, particularly this. I mean, Father Laurence and others have taught me about meditation, is that we come to it with an expectation, but as we get into it more, we let go of the expectations of what it would bring, but we just do it for its own sake. And I think your words have given us hope on this International Day of Hope, which is a beautiful coincidence. If you wouldn't mind staying with us, Tom, in case people have questions later, or if you want to come in, if you want to pipe up and ask another one of our panelists questions, that would be fantastic. And because I'm trying to keep some time for questions at the end, but do stay
Absolutely.
if you can.
We're just pulling our boat out the water right now.
Fantastic.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen in. So I will be here, but you won't be able to see me.
We don't want to interrupt your work, but
no, don't worry.
No, it's fantastic to have a live feed from all this stuff going on. But really appreciate you joining, Tom. Thank you so much, and
thank you.
To come back in later.
Great.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm very happy now to introduce Margaret Renkl, who's our next guest, hoping that Margaret's online. Margaret is an award-winning New York Times best-selling author of several books, including The Comfort of Crows, A Backyard Year and Late Migrations, A Natural History of Love and Loss. She's also an opinion writer for the New York Times, and her columns focus on nature, politics, and culture. And we're very lucky that she's here today with us to talk about species loss, which of course is an issue that is being exacerbated by climate change. Welcome, Margaret. Thank you very much for joining us. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your work on species loss, and in particular, what it is in particular about birds that draws you to them. Margaret, over to you.
I have to be careful because the word work, especially following Tom, suggests that I'm actually doing something about extinction. And really all I'm doing is lamenting and grieving and trying to find words for that grief. I'm a writer and a generalist. I don't really have any work that contributes to the cause of preventing extinction. All I can do, I think, is find words for what that loss means when the opportunity to do that comes up. I don't, as a writer, I don't always choose my subjects, so I don't always get to address that subject, but it is a question that it's just almost impossible for me to understand why this would not be an emergency in everyone's mind, because we are here temporarily. We have simply borrowed the time we have here. It's not ours. The place we live is not ours. It is the future's, and it is the past's. We are just a little teeny tiny blip. So why it wouldn't feel obligatory in those circumstances to make sure that the beauty and the joy that we experience and the peace we feel in the natural world isn't still here for our children and our grandchildren and for the unimaginable inhabitants of the planet long after we're gone.
Yeah. So on that note, I mean, first of all, I think you underestimate the impact of the work or whatever you want to call it that you do, because it's really important to get these stories across to people. But I'd like to just come up with a particular illustration here to give the audience a little bit of a reality check that we're not talking the abstract, but something specific, because in all the talk of statistics of climate change and extinctions, etc., we lose in all the numbers the story at the center of it all. And I just wanted to highlight one example, which is the slender-billed curlew, which, like all life, was the product of millions of years of evolution. And Leo, I was wondering if you could just put a picture of that on the screen, if you have that to hand. This beautiful bird was declared extinct in 2024. And actually, just even saying that with mindfulness makes me feel very overwhelmed, actually. Whereas we hear these statistics all the time and we can say them, but it's only when we pause to actually understand the enormity of that we can really connect with the gravity of it. This extinction wasn't abstract. It happened during our lifetimes, and we as a species allowed it to happen because we were not paying adequate attention. So I think what I'd like to ask you, Margaret, is through the writing that you do and what motivates you, why should we pay attention to the loss of a single species? Why do you care so much about this?
Well, I think it's worth pointing out in the context of this slender-billed curlew that there was no point at which the interests of this bird conflicted with the interests of human beings. It was not used, its feathers were not used in hats. It was not eaten by hungry people. I mean, there is a reality in which when you accept, as the film you played at the beginning of this program argued for, that human beings are a part of nature, then what we need also matters. But there wasn't I'm not saying that what we need matters more than what another species matters. I'm just saying that it's part of the equation. And with this particular little bird, it wasn't in any way in conflict with us. And yet, we lost it. In fact, it was probably lost before we even developed a conservation plan to save it. And that is stunning to think about for me. And I think maybe for a lot of people, just the idea that we could be, watching a television program or, planning a trip to the beach and giving no thought at all to the consequences of, for example, the way we live. There's not, and we don't, and I think there are good reasons for that. I think that the economic forces are at play in the 21st century are keeping many people from understanding the consequences of their own actions. I can't believe it. It's impossible for me to believe how many people drive 8-passenger trucks to go to the grocery store. They're just not even thinking about it. It's just not even crossing their minds. And so part of what a writer can do, as opposed to an actual conservationist, is to try to make these points clear, that our behavior happens within the context of a vast living, multi-layered tapestry of life. And it is a miracle. And if we just step back from foolish consumption, and if we interrogate a little bit the lies that are being told to us, I'm just thinking of it, for example, the way AI has undercut significant progress in renewable energy. These data centers in the US, they're always put in places where people are powerless to fight them or feel they are. And in a typical, Chat GPT search takes 8 times the energy that a Google search does. And nobody's asking that question. Is this a better choice for me? Or are there costs to this choice? And I think that's what we have to do. What are the costs of our choices? And that plays into the extinction discussion, but not only that discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to drill a little bit deeper on that, because you sort of mentioned about getting people's attention, and of course the curlew that we saw, the slender-billed curlew, that it didn't have any, it wasn't a meteor that made this extinct like the dinosaurs. It didn't have any reason why it should do so. We were the metaphorical meteor. So can we say a little bit more about how, through your work, and how all of us can get people to pay more attention to the fact that we're the cause of this, to get people to pay attention that they're driving a big truck on their own when they don't necessarily need to do that, and the connection between that and the damage that we're seeing?
I don't think shaming people generally has a very beneficial effect. I think that it's much better to try to, when I was a high school English teacher trying to teach British poetry to teenagers, it became very clear to me very early on that the best tool I had in communicating the importance of that kind of writing to people who felt extremely distant from it, both in time and in space, was to love it in front of them. And human beings are social creatures. They respond to emotional cues. And when you love something in front of somebody else, there's at least a half decent chance that they might go, oh, maybe it would be nice if to try that, or to think about that, or to consider that. I mean, we have shorebirds in the United States are especially endangered. And it's not just the slender-billed curlew, but the piping plover, for example. These birds that nest on the ground are very vulnerable, obviously, to predators, but also to the ocean. And just a simple change, like the number of people you see on the beach whose dogs are off the leash.
Hmm.
And you think about the risk, not just to shorebirds, but also to turtle nests. I mean, one of the things Tom was talking about was the different perceptions that animals have of the world. And we don't always think, okay, well, this dog that I've let off leash because, gosh, the joy of watching a dog frolic in the waves, and anybody can feel that. But to ask the question, is it right to let my dog off leash when there are all these other vulnerable creatures who didn't evolve to deal with dogs on a beach?
Can I ask you a little bit more about this point you made about loving nature in front of people and seeing if that might change their minds? In your Ken Burns UN interview, you mentioned grand vistas as a conduit to holiness. Do you think this sort of reverence for nature and the world could help change people's perception?
I do think we have a moment, we're in a moment that's very upsetting and disturbing, where people of faith have found a very tiny little box to put God in. And if they could recognize, I mean, really, if they could just read the book of Genesis, maybe they would have a little bit better understanding of stewardship. But the idea that holiness is not only in human structures, but in the structures that long predated human beings, the systems, the intricate and beautiful systems of the intertwined life in any particular habitat, maybe that would help. Maybe they would see the grandness in it if they saw it as a product of creation and not of random forces. I don't think it matters whether you call it creation or you call it evolution. It's the same thing. It's still a miracle.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I think we've prepared you for this, Margaret, but I was going to ask you to read from your poem, The Peace of Wild Things. I'm wondering if you have anything, if you would be prepared to do that, and if you wanted to say anything before you read an excerpt from that before.
It's not an excerpt, it's the entire poem. It's very short.
Mm.
It's written by Wendell Berry, a Kentucky poet and novelist and essayist and activist and farmer. And the thing that amazes me about this poem, I read it in 1980 as a college student. But the poem appears for the first time in a book that was published in 1968. And think about this. Think about Wendell Berry thinking about these questions in 1968. The same questions. I mean, this could be the voice of my own heart, my own conscience in 2025. The peace of wild things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I was wondering if I could ask you one more question. It's obviously a big one, but what does the grace of the world mean to you?
You know, one thing I will take issue a little bit with Wendell Berry. I don't think well, maybe I don't want to assume, but when he talks about the peace of wild things, He must not be referring to the peaceable kingdom. He's not talking about a system where the lion lies down with the lamb. I think he's talking about the peace that we feel in the presence of wild things. And that is the grace of the world, that when we allow ourselves to belong to it, to love it, to accept the things about it that trouble us. Predation bothers a lot of people. They would prefer not to think about that. But it is part of a beautiful system. And when we think of it that way, it's easy to love the predator as much as the prey, I think.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think very much centered in the whole purpose of what we're discussing here. I'm not going to draw those links. I think it will be very apparent to everyone who's listening. But thank you so much for joining us, Margaret. If you also, I don't know, I think you may have to leave us, but if you're able to stay with us, you're very welcome. People may have questions, and I already see from the chat you have many fans there who I'm sure would like to ask you some questions if you can stay.
I'll be glad to stay. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm going to turn now to our next guest, who is an author, filmmaker, and LA Times environment reporter, Rosanna Xia, who was named a Pulitzer Prize finalist for explanatory reporting. She produced and directed the award-winning feature documentary Out of Plain Sight, and her celebrated book, California Against the Sea, won the PEN America E.O. Wilson Literary Science Writing Award. So very well qualified to be here. Welcome, Rosanna. We're going to start by sharing the trailer to Rosanna's documentary, which has just started playing at film festivals, and it will be available for streaming later this year. It's a haunting film on ocean pollution and takes us deeper into that universe that we touched on with Tom earlier. So Leo, if you wouldn't mind playing that trailer, if it's possible.
It was one of those holy crap moments. Somebody just filled this up with industrial waste, kicked it off of a ship, and it's just been sitting here on the seafloor ever since.
As I'm learning about the way we've polluted the ocean, I feel like we never really finished the DDT story.
There's still a whole lot we don't know. And this is ground zero. We're talking about a place where potentially 500,000 barrels of it were dumped.
We'll go ahead and put a team out there as soon as possible.
It's very abnormal to have a wildlife species developing a cancer at such a high prevalence.
It's striking just how much sea lions can tell us about the environment that we also live and swim and breathe in.
That's the part that to me is so scary. What are the long-term effects of this contaminant being out there? Not only to the wildlife, but to humans that we, we're in this together, right?
This is another interpretation of what a forever chemical means, right? When people use that term, they often mean forever means it just sits in the environment and never goes away. Well, the impact may be forever, too.
Is the story that we're about to share with the public a unknown chapter of history, a secret chapter of history, or was it a forgotten chapter of history? We treated the ocean like the world's biggest trash can.
Well, extremely powerful. I have to say, I just feel this overwhelming sense of grief, following on from the slender Bill Curlew, and then what we just saw. It reminds me when I was a child growing up in the UK government used to drop barrels of nuclear waste from nuclear power plants overboard from ships, with the view that it would just disappear and the problem would be taken care of. So thank you for joining us, Rosanna. I'm going to ask you the question that you asked in that trailer, which is this a forgotten chapter of history or an unknown chapter of history?
Yeah, thank you. And it is truly an honor to be here. This is such a thoughtful and beautiful way to bring us all together. And yeah, I love everything that you have been saying about attention and awareness, because with this documentary, it really was about making an invisible issue visible, and spoiler alert, this ocean dumping was not illegal in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. It wasn't just happening off the coast of California. It was happening in the UK. It was happening off of France. It was happening, in South America, everywhere. Every coastline in the world has a story like this. And we just collectively forgot about this history and moved on. And, as an environmental journalist, I am usually, so focused on climate change and all the issues weighing on our future. But this story from our past was really calling to me. And I felt an immense duty to give it my full storytelling and investigative reporter attention. Because, how can we truly talk about climate solutions and problem solving for the future when we keep forgetting these lessons from our past? And especially with the ocean, building on what Tom was saying earlier, we tend to have such a land-centric way of thinking about our planet. This dumping was allowed because pouring all our unwanted trash into the ocean felt out of sight, out of mind. But we are all connected to this greater ecosystem. And just because we forgot about a problem does not mean the problem just goes away. I think you're muted.
Sorry, it strikes me this theme of opening our horizons, so that we didn't think that the ocean was a boundary. We thought it was boundless, and now we're seeing through your work and Tom's that that's not the case. And again, there's this connection, I think, between the humility and the unknowing.
Yes.
So, I mean, maybe you could say a little bit more about that. How is it that we've managed to sort of turn away from the obvious, that this isn't a limitless resource? What do you think, this lack of awareness, where do you think that's coming from?
Well, working on this documentary, and I was working on it at the same time as the book, which we'll talk about, and that the book is about sea level rise. I think it really made me think more deeply about just how the story of the ocean is both a story of the past and also a story of the future, and how we humans have really messed things up because the ocean, this incredible and incredibly powerful body of water, can feel so separate from where we are standing on land. Even with sea level rise, it's like we're building seawalls thinking we can hold off the most massive body of water on the planet. I was talking to a deep sea researcher actually the other day, and he said, if aliens came down to Earth to start studying life on Earth, they wouldn't be starting on land. They'd be going to the bottom of the ocean. And we are a planet of water, but we do tend to forget that because, as what Tom was saying, we are standing on land thinking about everything from a very land-centric view.
Yeah. And when you mentioned your book there, Rosanna, and I'd like to sort of turn to that a little bit, and this question of climate and storytelling, and to look to the future. So I know from speaking with you before that in the writing of this book, you talked to many people on the issue of sea level rise, people with many wide-ranging and often conflicting perspectives, and people with different backgrounds and lived experiences. What I'm really interested in, particularly selfishly for the work that I do, is how did you manage to connect with these people and bring all those different voices together?
Yeah, and I feel such kinship to the work that you do, and also deep admiration for the work that you do. Yeah, one of the things that actually really, really surprised me in the course of reporting and writing this book, California Against the Sea, is just how much commonality I actually found. Even with people on completely opposite sides of the issue. Once you get past the first few layers of anger or denial or frustration, everyone I talked to had a deep, deep love for the ocean and for their community, the community that they chose to move to and to call home and to settle. And, everyone I talked to had something to say about the future that they still hoped will exist for future generations. But, finding these common threads does take deep listening. And I love what you have been saying about humility, because it is so important to put yourself not just in someone else's shoes when you're having these conversations, but also in their vulnerability. Like you can have such a different conversation if you start with questions like, what do you care about? Or what are you worried about? What keeps you up at night? Rather than, starting off being like telling someone that they're wrong, or like, why aren't you doing this about climate change? Or why are you resisting this thing that would be good for the planet? And, I actually, when I first started, I'd be knocking on doors, cold calling people. And I found myself so often asking people like, wait, don't close the door. Like, why don't you want to talk to me? Like, what are you worried about? Let's unpack this together. And, also, what questions do you have? I'm about to go talk to the Coastal Commission. I'm about to go talk to this famous climate scientist. Like, what should I be asking them that could help you sort through what you're feeling? And I think, ultimately we end up at the same place, but starting that conversation in a different place has been really, really powerful. And, I'm reminded too of this quote that I heard from Naomi Klein a couple years ago. She had just written a brilliant book on conspiracy theories and misinformation. I remember actually listening to her interview as I was driving to like a talk I was about to give. And she basically said, conspiracy theorists get the facts wrong, but the emotions right. And I was like, and that's why conspiracy theories take off. And I was like, oh my God, and I've been thinking about that quote ever since. And I think it really is important to remember the emotional aspects of this conversation, right? Even if our work is grounded in what the facts and numbers say, it's so important to start by validating what someone is feeling, even if you don't agree with them, or even if those feelings aren't necessarily grounded in facts that are true or facts that are science-based, because all these emotions are real, and we have a duty to understand why people are feeling the way they're feeling in order to actually make progress and actually move forward on the issue together.
Can I just drill a little bit deeper into that? Because in the work that I do, I work in the international climate negotiations, and it strikes me that we have all the money in the world needed to solve the climate crisis. We just choose to spend it on different things. And we have the technological solutions to at least solve a very big chunk of the problem now, while we try to develop further solutions in the future. But we're choosing as a species not to do that. So to me, it seems that it's not necessarily facts and the force of argument and data that is going to win this battle. And yet that seems to be the game plan that those of us who have been trying to fight the climate emergency have been. The work that you and Margaret and Tom and others are doing in storytelling is just so vital now. Maybe you could just say a little bit more about how you tap into that with people. How do you find the common ground? How do you make them feel safe enough to engage in something when they may not be willing to confront their own emotions on these issues?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, I can take that in so many directions, but the first thing that popped into my head was just trust. I think we have a trust issue in this world today. I think so much of it begins with trusting the person that is delivering said information to you, and the facts, and the what the right solutions are. And like with your work, and I was just actually talking to an environmental planner in a city environmental planner, and I think planners have a lot of things in common with what you do and what I do as a journalist. But if we joke that if everyone hates your plan or your story just a little bit, that means you were fair because you listen to all sides and no one's completely happy. But I also think the flip side of that is if you can release something where everyone feels heard, that is super important. And this planner told me that planning moves at the speed of trust. And I think we have we have a trust issue in this world. And also we do not give the time that we have, that we need to have these conversations. And we are admittedly running out of time. But I think, for me as a journalist, I say this a lot to journalism students too, like your first conversation with someone does not have to be the conversation where you get the quote and all of the things that you need for the story. It's not the first conversation is not the conversation where you have the breakthrough. The first conversation is, oh my God, I grew up watching Star Wars too. Or your kid plays soccer. Let's go meet up at their game if that's easier for you. Or what is your favorite beach? I'd love to go for a walk with you and just see the shoreline through your eyes. And I think, by building trust, and there's a power in coming back to a community too, rather than parachuting into a community and telling them what they need to do and what's best for them, but actually listening first on what they need and what they're worried about. And by the third, fourth, fifth, sixth conversation, the relationship starts to build, the trust and the conversation, and it actually becomes an exchange rather than a transaction of information. And I think that in my line of work has been very, very effective.
You know, that really resonates with me because it's this, you mentioned being heard, but for someone to be really heard, it means that one has to really listen. And
Yes.
I think that's a real connection between the theme here of awareness, and also some of us took part in a meditation before the webinar started. Being in a place where we can really hear people rather than reacting out of our own judgments, I think is important. You, I know you've done a lot of work on climate anxiety, and you've written an essay about that. I think we might be able to share the link, both of your book and the essay, in the chat. All of this can feel pretty overwhelming, right? And I know that I have moments where I think we all have to protect ourselves who work in this area, otherwise we wouldn't be able to carry on. But there are moments where we do feel overwhelmed. Could you say a little bit more about climate anxiety and your work on that? Yeah,
Yeah, and one more thought to just another thought popped into mind now, Bridget, to anxiety. I will never forget when my my book editor sat me down after I finished the first draft of the book, and she was like, Rosanna, this is great. There's so many great details, so many great facts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, and there's always a but when you talk to your editor, she was like, but a book needs to attend to not just the reader's intellectual journey, but also their emotional journey and ultimately their philosophical journey. And, as an old school newspaper reporter, I was like, oh my God, I've been so focused on the intellectual journey, on translating the science and making sense of the policy and making sure I got the facts right for the reader. But I realized I needed to also help the reader make meaning out of these facts and to attend to the emotional journey. And, and anxiety was something that, came up a lot. It's a word that I questioned. And, I feel like, anxiety in some ways is the fear of worrying about something that hasn't happened yet, right? And if you talk to any community that we would define as an environmental justice or frontline community, most of them weren't telling me when I talked to them that they were anxious per se. That was not the word they were using, even if maybe what they were feeling is related to that universe of emotions. They were telling me that they were frustrated, they were stressed, angry, grieving. And, on first glance, like this anxiety, the way I hear about it in a lot of spaces, seems rooted in a fear that we'll never go back to normal. But who is benefiting from keeping things normal? And what are we actually afraid of losing? Like those were some of the philosophical questions that I started to ask in the book, and also later when my LA Times editor asked me to write a big piece on climate anxiety. Like, when you hear statements like climate change is the existential crisis of our time. Yes, absolutely. But, I've talked to also so many Indigenous leaders in California, or what we call California today, who would, they would say that their communities have been facing an existential crisis long before climate change became the all-consuming issue of the day. And yet, so many of these communities have found ways to continue to sing and love and carry on their culture and to take care of each other and to be resilient through it all. And as I'm like unpacking all these layers, it's like, ultimately, yes, this book is a book about sea level rise and how we're supposed to battle the ocean and deal with the rising ocean. But ultimately, at its heart, like I think this book and a lot of the work that I do today is actually an exploration of our fear of change and ultimately of our capacity for change. And change, yes, is so scary, but does it have to be? Like that's like we so often frame this conversation of climate change adaptation, of reconfiguring our homes and communities to accommodate sea level rise around what it is that we have to give up or sacrifice, But this issue can truly be reframed as a conversation about what we could gain if only we started this visioning process now. How can we actually, how can the process of planning and sea level rise adaptation actually be an opportunity to address the things that haven't been working for so many communities for such a long time? When you frame it this way, that's when the brainstorming starts to happen. That's when the creative planning and the community visioning actually starts to happen.
And I think this question of the fear of change, again, it's I'm not the philosopher or the theologian, but I think that this is the core of the problem in a way, because I think as humans we try to arrange on our world to keep ourselves secure and keep things as they are. And of course, as we spoke with Tom, uh, everything is change, even in conservation biology. So I think there's a real thread there between this and also this core of meditation and awareness and consciousness. But we've spoken about anxiety on this International Day of Hope, which today is. I'd like to ask you about that. What gives you hope in your work? You've talked to all these people. Are you hopeful?
Well, on this International Day of Hope, I think about this a lot, and I get asked this a lot, not just like how my own hope, but also like how much hope do I owe the reader when writing about climate change? This is something that comes up a lot in the climate communication space. And, for years, I really wrestled with this balance between giving the reader hope and urgency, hope and despair, because if you give someone too much hope, they're able to put the article down and move on to the next thing, or to think about, there's always something more short-term and more pressing that you can give your attention to. But if you give someone too little hope at the end of a book, at the end of an article, that lack of hope can lead to a despair that can paralyze and lead to just inaction or nihilism, or just, well, whatever, we can't do anything, so I might as well live my life. And, ask 10 climate journalists this question and they'll give you a range of different answers on what the right balance might be. And there's actually a whole movement of writers who think that anger is a very effective, anger and outrage are effective emotions. And I personally find anger to be activating, but maybe not sustainable. I sense a lot of burnout in this space a lot. And I think that is somehow related to the emotion of anger. But, for me, in the process of writing this book, like, I realized that the emotions I should be indexing on, like, is responsibility. Like, that's what keeps me going. Like, and for me, it's like, does someone, after reading my book or one of my articles or after watching the documentary, do they feel a sense of responsibility to do something? And that do something doesn't have to be, fix climate change or take all the chemicals out of the ocean. It can literally be joining a community garden or just talking to your neighbor about the issue and continuing the conversation, or to what Margaret was saying, like being more mindful of unnecessary waste in our day-to-day lives. And that doesn't require, like, how much hope you need to have. If you feel a sense of duty and responsibility to keep the conversation going, like, that's what I'm grounding people on. And that sense of duty takes courage. So, ultimately, like, courage and responsibility are the two emotions that have kept me grounded through all of this. And, like, how do I give more people the courage to care?
Yeah, I think there's a real theme that's coming through with the work that you do, and Margaret and Tom. And Tom sort of said it's about just doing something and being really involved in that thing and not necessarily being attached to the outcome.
Yes.
And that's much more profound. Just before we conclude speaking with you, Rosanna, I'd like you, if you wouldn't mind, to read a passage from you've done a book, written a book on, on your book, but to speak about resilience. And maybe
Yes.
you could read a passage from that. That I'd be really grateful if you're prepared to do that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Like, as a writer, I started questioning every single word that we use to talk about climate change. And, that's a very profound theme that's coming up in today's program as well. And the word resilience was the one that tripped me up the word. This is the most. This is a word that comes up so often in climate science and policy spaces. But I really started to wonder, like, what does it actually mean to be resilient? What does it mean to be a resilient community, or to have, like, a resilient coastline? And so many of us have internalized this word to mean having the strength to remain unchanged. Hurricane Katrina levels New Orleans, and we shall rebuild exactly what we lost, exactly where we've lost it. In America, the insurance system has also historically been set up to, like, you lose your home in a fire, you get money to build that exact same home in the exact same place, exactly the way it is. But again, like, is maintaining the status quo what we actually want? Like, have we paused to really think about that? And so I started asking, like, every single person that I was interviewing, like, what does resilience mean to you? How do we redefine this? If you had the opportunity to redefine it. And I'll read a short passage from chapter 7 where we meet Charles Lester, whose answer just like clicked everything for me. And Charles Lester was the former executive director of the California Coastal Commission, and he's now leading this really big ocean and coastal policy research center at UC Santa Barbara. And so the he in this passage is Charles Lester. He's been mulling over this word, resilience, that comes up so often with climate change. For those still thinking in terms of man versus nature, resilience means having the strength to rebuild in the same place after a catastrophe, to resume life as it was before. The standard way we talk about resilience is this ability to bounce back, Lester said. Resilience is often about making sure we are strong enough to not be changed. But what if we should change? More and more sociologists, economists, even engineers are now questioning who exactly benefits from preserving the world the way it is today. Whose wealth, whose property, whose history gets preserved by maintaining the status quo? We've seen increasing gentrification and disparities in wealth. We've seen the cost of housing in the coastal zone go through the roof, and we've seen an exposed, impoverished political system that in many cases is driven by power and vested interests, as opposed to larger interests of society and the community, he said. So in my mind, we need to figure out how to adapt, but it's so much deeper than that. He pulled out a paper written in 2020 by Brian H. Walker, a renowned ecologist in Australia who poses a broader way of thinking about resilience. Resilience includes knowing when an unwanted transformation is inevitable, Walker wrote, and instead deliberately transforming all or parts of the system such that the new system delivers what is valued and wanted. Adaptation ultimately is about choice. It's about choosing what to preserve, choosing what to let change, and choosing what to intentionally change in a new and reimagined way. To resist change is to miss out on opportunities to create a better future. To remain unchanged is to buy into the long-held myth that the world today is as good as it gets. To ignore this choice to mend our relationship with the land and with each other is to believe that the systems we're still holding on to, systems built on social inequities, historical injustices, and the willful control of nature, are the way that things should always be.
Thank you so much, Rosanna. I think that was so interesting for me as well, because there's always deep debates in the international negotiations as to the meaning or distinction between adaptation and resilience. And I think that there's this constant theme here coming through this webinar of that the universe is always, creation is always changing. But what is that constant to which we can stay anchored and tethered amongst that change in a way that is comforting, but also alleviates suffering for all creation. So thank you so much for that. I hope that you can also stay with us, because I'm sure if we have time, people will have lots of questions, and I'm sure people will look forward to your film when it comes out, and we'll be reading your book. So thank you so much, Rosanna, for joining us. Please do stay on. And you mentioned you mentioned the experience of Indigenous peoples, and in that context, I'm very happy indeed to introduce Dr. Lyla June Johnston, who's an Indigenous musician, author, and community organizer, and she blends her study of human ecology at Stanford, her graduate work in Indigenous wisdom, and the traditional worldview she grew up with to inform her art, her music, and her poetry. Lyla June, thank you so much for being here with us. It's really wonderful to have you with us. We heard from Rosanna there that Indigenous peoples have been experiencing much of these changes that we're talking about in different ways for a long time. But I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your work and what drew you to that work.
So I'll just introduce myself first, the customary way, if that's okay.
Of course, please.
Yeah, greetings, my relatives and my people. I'm from the Nanisht-Ejitachitni clan of the Dene Nation, which we get our clan name from our mothers. So we get our last name from our mothers in our culture, not from our fathers. And the Dene Nation is also colonially known as Navajo people. But we prefer the term Dene because that's actually our real name. We are indigenous to what is now called New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah, but we call it Denebakea, the people's land. My second clan is Success Bashishchin. So that's my father's mother's clan, which is the Southern Cheyenne. She was from Anadarko, Oklahoma. And my third clan is Ashi Dashiche, Salt clan. It's my mother's father's clan. Auto Bilagana Edashinale. My fourth clan, my father's father, is Bilagana, or the European clan, specifically Scottish descent. Akwit ego Dene as Anishta. In that manner, I present myself as a Dene woman. I'm honored to be here. And I think, you know, what I would like to start with is 4 breaths. You know, we've heard a lot in this beautiful, extraordinary gathering that you have all organized, and it's a lot. So let's just take 4 breaths, if that's okay. So how I came to my work, well, I guess it all started being born as an Indigenous woman. When you're born a Native woman, you're born into an intersection of battles, whether it's language extinction or the um, extremely high rate of destruction of our women through the missing and murdered Indigenous women's epidemic, to the resource extraction of your homelands, to the diabetes epidemic, to the alcoholism epidemic, poverty, extreme and systematic poverty. You could go on and on with all the things we're fighting in the context of American colonization. But there are now 574 federally recognized Native nations in the United States alone. So despite 500 years of colonization and the annihilation of 98% of our people, we're still going strong somehow. Don't ask me how it happened, but we're going strong, and we're very tough. We don't give up, and we're always going to be here to protect the land, and always also to protect our hearts, not just our hearts, but everybody's hearts, because the heart is the most important thing to protect, as which is what we're talking about here today. And I love what you're doing with all these amazing speakers. So I guess it all started being born into a convergence of wars, and being born a Native woman is you're basically born a warrior. But I wanted to share this quote about what a warrior is. And it's from Sitting Bull. And he said, "For us, warriors are not what you think of as warriors. The warrior is not someone who fights, because no one has the right to take another life. The warrior for us is one who sacrifices him or herself for the good of others. His task is to take care of the elderly, the defenseless, those who cannot provide for themselves, and above all, the children, the future of humanity." So I think all of us, as Indigenous peoples, and everyone on this call is Indigenous to somewhere and has Indigenous roots, beautiful roots, I would say, that we're born in as Indigenous peoples in the United States, as it were. We are born into a state of warriorhood because that's what our culture teaches us to do.
Can I ask you a question? I was really touched about what you said on the importance of protecting the heart of humans and all creation, and it really resonated with something that Father Laurence said right at the beginning. Also, this work that we heard from Rosanna before about speaking to people's emotions in the climate space rather than just facts and figures. in your role as a warrior, if I may use that, how do you use your artistic and creative side as well as your academic in order to bridge that gap between the thinking side and the emotional side of your work, and how could that offer some learning for those of us who are working on the climate crisis, to speak to people's emotions and to protect their hearts?
I mean, I've written some books, I've written a dissertation, I've written some essays, but I would say my most influential creations are definitely my songs.
Mhm.
That's just the way it is. I don't know. I mean, I think human beings are very connected to their hearts, actually, more than we might think. I loved what one of our speakers said of, you know, they get the emotions right, rather than the facts. But we're actually incredibly connected to our hearts, and I would say that's generally what moves us, whether we're male or female or two-spirit. And so the songs are gonna move people in a way that they can feel. It's kind of like creator, right? Like, how do you explain creator to someone, or God, or whatever you want to call it? You can't. You can't intellectually explain it to someone. They must feel it for themselves. And if you're a non-believer, just if you're a scientist, right? An atheistic scientist, do an experiment. Say, creator, are you there? I mean, can't hurt, right? And let creator show you. And creator will show you not through the intellect, but through the feeling, or through really, really weird coincidences that are purely impossible. Creator will show you that this world is not just atoms running into each other, that there is a purpose. And that can be confusing because it's like, okay, if there's a purpose, why are we all here suffering? And it's like, well, there is a purpose, and there's also a battle going on between what is close to creator and what is far from creator.
That's
So
really
just
beautiful. Yeah. No, that's very beautiful, and it really resonates very deeply with the themes of everything that we've heard. I'm going to pronounce this horrendously, so you have to forgive me. But you mentioned you're from the Dene Nation, and I was wondering if you could say something about the concept of Hozo. Have I said that correctly? How
so
the
it's like like Taj Mahal. So it's
Hojo.
Hojo. Hojo. Yeah,
Hojo,
you got it.
Hojo. Yeah. If you could tell us a little bit about the concept of Hojo and how that can offer an alternative way of perceiving the world. I see that Tom's rejoined us. He told us that we can't be sure actually that the sky is blue. I mean, we think it's blue, but we don't know. And this whole different ways of perceiving the world. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about Hojo and how that could maybe offer ideas of kinship and that the earth needs humanity just as humanity needs the earth.
Yeah, so a lot of my research, my PhD research, was looking at how Indigenous peoples sculpted vast regions of what we call Turtle Island, or other people call it North America, and how Indigenous peoples created those chestnut groves that grew from Maine down to Georgia, that human beings often acted, and in some cases still act, as keystone species, or species upon which entire ecosystems depend. And that in that sense, humanity is not bad. And so one of my biggest missions is to help humans relieve the existential shame of being human. Like, oh, I'm a bad human, I'm a pest, I'm a polluter, I'm a warmonger, I'm just. But in Dene cosmology, the word for human is Nahoka Dene, meaning the sacred earth surface beings. And we call ourselves sacred. And when we do call ourselves sacred, we acknowledge that we also belong. And we're also meant to be here. But we just have to be guided by the proper principles, such as Hojo, and the proper strategies. And then we can actually fulfill our ecological role as Homo sapiens in a way that no other species can do. No other species can do what native people have been doing with the clam gardens in the Pacific Northwest. No other species can regeneratively, safely burn prairie ecosystems at the right time of year so that the grasses are healthy the next year and so that the bison have enough pasturage to eat. No other species can plant the chestnut trees in such abundance, which then fed not only humans, but a whole host of species. No other species can, as the Chumash have in Los Angeles area, keep the balance of otters, abalone, and kelp for 10,000 years straight, as archaeological analysis infers. And so just like we can't do what the beaver can do, we can't do what the bumblebee can do, but we can do what we can do. And we were given these opposable thumbs and these big brains not to enable us to dominate the earth, but to enable us to steward the earth, which I know sounds cliche, but a lot of people view their power as a license to dominate when actually it's an enabler. It enables us to care for things. So Hojal is all about, it's translated as beauty, it's translated as joy, it's translated as balance. And Hojal is not only a ecological state, but it is an emotional state when you are in alignment with creation. And I think when we step back into Hojal, we step back into our true ecological purpose.
I really love that. It's just so beautiful. I really think I could spend an hour or 2 hours with each of our speakers, but one of the things that you said that really resonated was this sort of to release us from the shame, and I think to give us permission to be fully human in the full sense of how we're supposed to be living on this earth. And I think so much about the climate crisis is about shaming or pushing people into doing the right thing. And so I think it's just a really interesting concept to explore. I really hope that you could stay online, Lyla June, because we're going to move on to our final speaker, but I know lots of people will have questions for you at the end. If you could stay with us, I would really appreciate that if you have time to stay with us. Because I think you have a lot to offer. And I know that Indigenous peoples have fought really hard to have a voice on the international negotiations that I've been involved with. So I think there's a lot to learn from you. So thank you so much for joining us. Please do stay with us because I know that questions are coming into the chat and I'm hoping we'll have 10 or 15 minutes at the end and to bring you back in. But thank you so much. Our final speaker is Ethan Tapper, who's an internationally recognized forester, best-selling author and content creator from Vermont. In 2017, Ethan bought the highly degraded 175-acre forest that he now calls Bear Island, which I think is a beautiful coincidence because I think Father Laurence is involved with a different Bear Island off the coast of Ireland. Ethan's work is to heal the forest, and his work eventually became the subject of his book on how to heal a forest, the bittersweet work of tending a changing world. And I think that we're going to see a quick video from Ethan, if Leo could play that, if that works.
More than one thing can be true at the same time. We can do this work of ecosystem stewardship and restoration because it's something that we have to do, and also because it's something that we get to do. We can save these ecosystems because they're precious and they make our world functional, and we can also protect them because they make our world beautiful and because we like them. And because we want to live in a world that's a little bit more full of beautiful things. I'm here at Bear Island and I'm doing this little passive weeding practice that I do, just periodically going through these areas and just weeding around these special plants. The thing I'm weeding around right now is this, a species of fern called ostrich fern that often grows in these floodplains and riparian areas, and that gets really tall. Ostrich fern is a special species. It has all these amazing qualities, it provides all these amazing habitats. And another thing that's true is that when I was a little kid, I remember going to my cousin's house, and by the Saxons River, there was a forest of these ferns that were way over our head. And now I know that those are ostrich ferns. We can do this work of ecosystem stewardship and restoration in ways that are very dry and very serious and scientific, and we can do it in ways that at the same time are joyful and that are about not just promoting the functionality of these ecosystems, but also just this beautiful world that we want to live in. I want to live in a world that is functional and biodiverse and resilient. And I also want to live in a world where future generations of people can walk through these forests of ostrich ferns that tower way over their heads. So here at Bear Island, I'm making some great habitat And I'm also helping create a world that I want to live in.
I think that's a great introduction. It saves me a lot of work. Thanks so much for joining us, Ethan. I've got so many things to ask you, but only about 10 minutes to do it. And if we're going to have any questions from the audience, I mean, what is it about forests? What is it about forests that you find so alluring and has drawn you to your work?
Oh man, well, first of all, I just want to say it's such an honor to be here and such an honor to follow all these amazing speakers, and I think that I had this experience. So I donated a conservation easement on my land, Bear Island. And I had this experience. I went into like the town, just trying to get some money from the conservation fund to help fund this easement. And they asked me this question where they were like, I can't understand why you'd want to do something like this, right? Because in their mind, what I'm doing is giving away hundreds of thousands of dollars of value, right? Which is objectively not a smart thing to do. And I was so taken aback because I was just like, oh, ecosystems they're everything. This is the place where we live, right? And these are the things, the context within which everything that we love exists. And, what I really wanted to say was, I want to do it so that your grandchildren can have clean water to drink, and they can live in a beautiful, functional world. What I really said was, if you don't already know the answer to that question, it's kind of hard to explain, right? Which is, and my experience also is, I had this whole journey of trauma and injury and sort of coming to forests at this specific period of my time when actually they weren't a big part of my life growing up. And really this process of coming into them and then deepening, right? And then really, the more that I learn about them and the deeper that I get, the more that I love them and the more that I understand the importance of helping them heal.
I really loved what you said in your story about if you don't already know the answer. And I think the underlying theme of what everybody has been saying, I think if we peeled away the layers, is that we all do actually know the answer, don't we? But it's peeling away those layers to reveal the truth. I think all of our speakers have kind of alluded to that, and I guess that could be arguably the ultimate purpose of the meditation practice that we started with. I understand, I don't know if you've been prepared for this, but that you have an exercise that you might want to do with the audience to bring them into the world of forests and a healthy forest. I don't know if you're prepared to do that, Ethan.
Yeah, and I think So one thing that I do a lot of times when I speak to folks about forests is just to ask them to start by imagining, what is a forest, right? And it's this fun thing you get to do. You get to say, what is a forest? And suddenly you're in front of these groups of people and you get to see they're all doing it. And this is a question that they all know the answer to. And then I've had this experience of getting to ask this question in front of thousands of people. And it's this funny thing where we all know the answer. And then I press them a little bit on that answer and they absolutely crumble because it turns out that a lot of what we think about these ecosystems is very superficial. So a better definition, what I would invite you to like reimagine forests as, if we allow ourselves to go a little deeper, is to imagine forests by this definition of what we call a natural community. And this definition that I use is from this book called Wetland, Woodland, Wildland, which is a book about the natural communities of the place now called Vermont. And they define a natural community as, quote, an interacting assemblage of organisms, their physical environment, and the natural processes that affect them. And so the interesting thing about this definition is that I find that most people, when they think about what a forest is, we picture like this place with a bunch of trees, right? It's a wooded area. It's a place with a bunch of trees. We know it when we see it because there's trees there. But actually, when you allow yourself to go a little deeper, you start to see that it's not just these trees. It's these trees and these plants and these animals, the birds, the bears, the butterflies, the fungi, the microorganisms, all of the living pieces and parts of this ecosystem. And it's also these non-living things, or the things that we traditionally think of as non-living things, the physical environment, soils, waters, where in the world that ecosystem is. And it's also these natural processes, even the way that that ecosystem changes over time. So what this does for a lot of people is it helps us reframe the thing that we call the forest, right? From it's a place with a bunch of trees to this much deeper understanding, right? It's all of these living things, and it's this physical environment, the things that most people think of as non-living things. And it's these natural processes, even the way that forests change over time. And it's not just this semantic exercise, it's actually pragmatic, because when we change with the thing that we call the forest, it also changes what it means to care for the forest. It is not our job to keep every tree in the world alive. It's not our job to maintain these forests as they are. It's our job to care for this entire thing, right? All of these living things, all of this physical environment and these natural processes. And with a lot of things, my own experience was coming from a place where I really saw my role as a human to not be a keystone species, as Dr. Lyla June Johnston mentioned, but to be like a passive observer, right? I love these ecosystems so much that my job is just to remove myself from them entirely. And we can just be over here, the people, and we can just be over here, the thing we call nature, and everything will be fine. And what I find is that the deeper you go, the less sense that makes, right? The deeper you go with ecosystems, the less you're able to see them as these perfect and utopian places that need no help, right? And that are totally fine and will just heal themselves magically from anything. And the more deeper you go into our own sense of responsibility, the less you're able to kind of like justify inaction as an act of kindness.
I think there's a lot of overlap there between what you've been raising and our other speakers, including what Tom was saying in this sort of question of conservation biology. What's the purpose of preservation when things change? And I really like what you said about sort of being maybe paraphrasing, like the custodians of that change in a caring way, rather than trying to preserve. I know I'm hoping that if you're prepared to do that, that you would read to us from the last chapter of your book, because I want to make sure you have a chance to do that in our remaining time, and also so that we have some questions from people in the chat as well. Would you be able to do that, Ethan?
I am. I'm ready.
Great. Please go ahead.
Let me just say, so this is from my book, How to Love a Forest, which I'll tell you what, it has been such a gift and a privilege to get to go around and talking about forests, not just from a place of like, this is a thing that we need to protect or we all die, but from a place of like, this is a thing we get to do for love. And so here's a reading from the final chapter of How to Love a Forest. The storm clouds stamp their feet. They are corralled along the shifting path of the big river, thundering between the walls of the valley. The clouds move west, driven like cattle toward the mountains. As empty as it often feels, there is something beautiful about a life lived in the aftermath. Here in the junkyard of the Anthropocene, we hold the fate of the world, all of its ecosystems, all of its peoples in our hands. In this moment, we can allow this biosphere, our home, to sink further into dysfunction and disarray, or we can make the radical and bittersweet decisions necessary to choose a different path. Inside of this catalyzing moment, we have the opportunity to reimagine our relationship to ecosystems and our relationship to each other, to redefine what we are and what is precious to us. As empty as they often feel, there is something beautiful about a landscape of forests that are just a fraction of their true potential. The forests of our lives are still only at the beginning of their journeys. They may yet become diverse and complex, rich with legacies, ancient again. With our help, these forests may rediscover a capacity for life beyond imagining, an abundance that this world has not known for generations. I pick up another acorn, another product of thousands of years of adaptation and change, another precious thing chained to the legacies of the past and hurtling toward an uncertain future. Perhaps it is doomed. Perhaps it contains endless possibilities. Humidity cloaks the land, drawing tiny round beads of sweat from my skin. For a moment, the mountain is cast in golden light. It smells sharp and strong. As I touch another acorn, a raindrop strikes the back of my hand, rolling between the small bones of my fingers. Suddenly, droplets are stippling the soil like falling stars, throwing up little clouds of dust. I have nowhere to be, and so I kneel, watching the water run around the stumps and the upturned leaves, drawing spider webs on the earth. Someday I will tell my children that the caves in the talus above are a womb, the origin of all the black bears on the mountain, and that the springs in the big bowl are the source of all of its waters. Someday I'll walk these trails with my children and teach them to reimagine forests as communities of complexity and depth and expansiveness, communities that are fated to change, to celebrate both the miracle of life and the miracle of death. Someday I will kneel beside these stumps, a young forest blooming around me, and teach my children the imperfect truth of what it means to love a forest. Someday I will teach my children that this world is not ours to hold, but that we hold it anyway, that each of us is a steward for one brief and precious moment in time. Someday I will teach my children that despite everything, we are destined to thrive, that we are destined to live in a world that is beautiful. We owe too much to the future to be imprisoned by the past. As the storm passes over me, I am grateful to be anything at all, grateful to be alive at a time when there is so much worth saving. I want to live in the world that will arise from this moment, the world built by people who are brave and humble and resilient, who make countless bittersweet compromises, who live their lives with the dream of a better world burning in their chests. I want to live in a world that will be created by people planting acorns in the rain. Sometimes this life feels like autumn, the exhausted end of a boundless summer. Today, I choose to live in a world in which spring is just breaking, a world that is just awakening, just beginning to discover what it truly is. I look toward the broken ridge of the mountain and feel a powerful nostalgia, not for the past, but for the future. High above the storm, the light is swelling, calling everything upward toward a world that is just beginning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ethan. That's beautiful. It's making me want to visit your beautiful state of Vermont. I live in Washington, D.C., so it's not too far away. So hopefully I'll make it up there at some point. Thank you very much for joining us. And I'd really like to thank all of our panelists. I see that Margaret, Rosanna, and Tom are still on the line. We've been asked a whole bunch of questions. I don't know if you would mind turning your videos on. We've only got 9 minutes left, and I'd also like to bring Father Laurence in at the end. But I'm wondering if I could ask each of you, Tom, Rosanna, and Margaret, maybe 60 seconds each to leave us, 90 seconds each maybe, to leave us with a parting thought from what you've heard. Maybe really tapping into that sort of emotional side of what we've heard rather than the intellectual. I'm going to throw Tom under the bus first just because he's a fellow countryman. So Tom, you go ahead.
Put on tomorrow. Oh no. Okay. Well, I guess the thing that came up for me was just in all of these discussions of Umwelt, just kind of linking that to this idea of humans not hating themselves. That so much of discussion of like what other animals might experience centers on this idea that we could never imagine it, that it is impossible for us to conceptualize their lives because they have different senses. And I'm just not sure, like, I wonder if some of that sometimes comes from a sort of self-hatred that, you know, we are limited and we're bad and therefore we can't get them, and we shouldn't kind of presume that we could have commonality of experience enough for us to imagine ourselves into them. But we've been shaped by similar processes and have similar life challenges and have so many relationships in common that I'm not sure I buy that. And my curiosity is is towards imagining that other animals in their experiences share qualities of their relationships that would not necessarily be surprising to us and alien and indistinguishable from our own.
And I think that really ties into that concept of rejouer that Dr. Lyla June mentioned. Unfortunately, she had to leave, but also this giving humans the permission not to be ashamed of themselves. I think
yes.
I don't really understand it, but what she said definitely resonates, and it's something to pull the thread on. Margaret, I wonder whether you have any parting thoughts very briefly for people to think about, or if anything has been triggered in your heart, I would say, rather than in your head from what you've heard.
I agree with Tom. The thing that kept coming up from all of the speakers, these wonderful, warm, loving thoughts about our own species, which is so often absent from this conversation. And I think that just the idea that we aren't merely the destructive species, that we're also the creative species, and that we do have these giant brains, not alone among the creatures, but that we have the ability to imagine a different future from the one we think we are facing. It would be a mistake, I think, to just decide that the scientists and the engineers were going to solve this problem for us. But it helps to remember that we are the problem-solving species, and that when our love and our furious desire to protect our beloveds are engaged, we are capable of amazing things. And so it does help to see ourselves in kinship with one another and also with the world's other creative generative species.
The importance of being able to imagine a future, I think, is just a really critical thing. And this is the job of you and other storytellers. Rosanna, I'm going to jump to you if you have any final thoughts that's been triggered in your heart.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything that Tom and Margaret just said, and I guess, wow, this is just such a beautiful gathering. I think just going back to your question of hope, I guess, like I just want to say that it also gives me so much hope to be on this incredible Zoom with all of you, seeing so many of you interested in these tough questions and willing to learn and engage more deeply with everything and everyone. And Kaveh, it gives me so much hope to see you, and I know David Barry has been keeping so many things running in the background, and just everyone who put this program together, all the speakers today putting so much heart and care and just thoughtfulness into your work every single day. Like all the work that you're doing is in itself a daily practice of hope. None of us have given up, and I feel like it's worth indexing on that. So thank you all for keeping me so inspired today, and you've given me so much wonderful things to think about.
Definitely good to have hope on this day of all days, and I'd like to give Ethan the final word from the panelists. Ethan, did you have anything that's been triggered in your heart? We've just got a couple of minutes left.
I just think, one of the things that I think a lot about is hope. On this day of hope and trust as well. But one of the things that's so powerful about hope is that I say that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because when we feel hopeless, we do absolutely nothing. And so I think it's something that in many ways is like our, something that we get to feel, and also something that it's our responsibility to hold for each other, and to give people the hope that they need to then go out and do stuff, right, and change the world.
Yeah, that's a really good point to end on, I think. But Father Laurence, if you're still there, I'd like to bring you in for, we've got 3 minutes left.
Thank you. That's more than enough. I noticed that my friend and your friend Inga Rolf is here too, and it's pity we didn't have time to ask her to speak about her work in the Arctic and the way she's been working with what this group of young women around the world to raise awareness of the importance of the Arctic and the crisis of its survival. But we can't do everything. And I think I would just end with this word wonderful, but maybe just unpack the word a little bit. Wonder, you could say, I began with that actually, if you remember. Wonder is the suspension of our capacity to compare. And we are always comparing and saying which is better, which is worse, which is my favorite, who is the best, and all that sort of thing. But when we are truly, I think, in touch with the truth, we are in a state of wonder. And that sense of wonder connects us to the whole of which we are part, and of which all the things that fill us with wonder communicate to us. And it's that personal connection with the whole, multiplied, replicated as many times as there are sentient beings on the earth. That's our hope, I think, that we can not just analyze and, dissect and measure, but we can experience that there is a oneness and a wholeness that each of the speakers today, wonderfully, in a literal sense of that word, wonderfully expressed. So I'm most grateful to them and to you for your skill, and I'm surprised we haven't solved the climate crisis by now, because you're a pretty good facilitator. But I'm sure we will. And just thank you very much for allowing us all to taste with a sense of wonder the wonderful diversity of human beings who are experiencing their connection with the world.
Thank you so much, Father Laurence. I think you've more than in any way that I could do really identified that thread, which is the sense of wonder that you started with. But I think, as you said, all of our panelists, and I really share also what Rosanna said, that these sort of gatherings really do give me hope. And I think it's important to remember that we're not in a minority. We're just not being heard. I think most people are like this. I think most people, if not all people, are good people. They just need to discover that in themselves. And my dream is to actually get all of our panelists, Ethan, Tom, Rosanna, Margaret, and Lyla June, into a room. So maybe we could do that. But I really would like to thank them all. I feel very inadequate. They're really wonderful, amazing leaders in what they do. And I also want to thank David Barry very much, who's the unsung hero of this. He did all of the work in the background, and I just had to show up and turn on my camera. So thank you to him. But with that, I'd like to, and I'm sorry that we couldn't ask all your questions, but they've been seen in the chat, and I know that the panelists have been looking at them, and I'm sure that they will inspire them. I'm going to now turn to Matt from WCCM USA, if he's there, Matt, to have the final word and to close the meeting. But thank you again to my wonderful panelists. I really hope that we get to meet in person sometime soon.
Thank you from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of WCCM USA for sharing in this event. I am feeling encouraged. I am feeling hopeful. And it's a beautiful thing to have such fantastic speakers, that the wisdom that has been shared both in the chat with the questions and certainly with our panelists and our moderator. And so we hope that this is adding to your life and that all of us in some way will come from this event more given to wonder, more given to attention that brings us into the wholeness of things, and that from this event, we will all go to share more fully in the peace of wild things. Lots of gratitude for you all.